An Army vet reportedly died in Ukraine. And Florida will send National Guard troops to the southern border. All of that and more today, May 18th, 2023. Good morning, early birds. I'm Jonathan Lehrfeld, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. First up, a retired Special Forces soldier died in Ukraine. A heads up to listeners that this story does contain descriptions of violence that some may find disturbing. According to reports and information from U.S. officials, retired National Guard Staff Sergeant Nicholas Mamer died after a building collapse amid a Russian attack in Bakhmut. Other Americans working in Ukraine told CNN Mamer was working with a nonprofit group seeking to aid civilians and train Ukrainian troops. The leader of the Russian Wagner Group Private Military Corporation appeared in a Tuesday video posted to Telegram that displayed a body and U.S. documents that appeared to belong to Mamer. The Russian oligarch claimed Mamer had been directly fighting against his troops. Military Times could not independently verify the video's authenticity. Mamer's uncle told the Idaho Statesman that the body in the video was that of his nephew. A State Department spokesperson told Military Times that officials are aware of reports of the death of a U.S. citizen in Bakhmut and are seeking additional information. The spokesperson cautioned that their ability to verify death reports is extremely limited. Here's why it matters. A number of American veterans have also reportedly died while in Ukraine since the start of the war. Recently, in February, 28-year-old Army veteran Andrew Peters died fighting on the front lines. It's not clear whether Mamer experienced combat before he went to Ukraine. A spokesperson for the Idaho National Guard said that Mamer's military career took him from active duty Army to the Idaho Army National Guard. He also served stints in the Utah and California Guard. Mamer was qualified as a Special Forces engineer sergeant, an infantryman, a cavalry scout, and a tank crewman. Mamer received at least 1 Army Commendation Medal and 5 Army Achievement Medals during his 20-year career. The U.S. government continues to discourage Americans from traveling to join the fight in Ukraine. Another important story: the Pentagon's policy chief is set to resign this summer. Colin Kahl has served in the spot in the Biden administration for 2 years. A defense official told us that Kahl will return to his role as a professor at Stanford University in California. The official was not allowed to speak about the matter publicly and spoke on the condition of anonymity. Kahl is still notifying his colleagues about the plan. The official said that Stanford originally agreed to allow Kahl a 2-year leave of absence from his professorship. But as that deadline approached, Kahl got Stanford's permission to stay for a few more months. The extension will allow him to remain in his role advising Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin through the NATO summit in July. The summit will be in Vilnius, Lithuania. The Senate voted on party lines in favor of his confirmation in 2021. Republican lawmakers criticized Kahl for his support of the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran. During the hearing, he also apologized for some language in tweets criticizing Republican lawmakers during the Trump administration.
To state the obvious, the last few years have been pretty polarizing on social media. I'm sure there are times that I got swept up in that. There were a number of positions that President Trump took that I strongly opposed. I think the language that I used in opposing those was sometimes disrespectful, and for that I apologize.
The Senate Armed Services Committee was deadlocked on his nomination. Vice President Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote to advance it. The Senate ultimately voted to confirm Kahl 49-45 when a few Republican senators were absent. Kahl served as Deputy Assistant to President Barack Obama and National Security Advisor to then Vice President Joe Biden from 2014 to 2017. In other news, the Navy is investigating drinking water contamination aboard 2 aircraft carriers. For more on this, Senior Navy Times reporter Jeff Zulowitz breaks it all down for us.
Jeff Zulowitz, thank you for stopping by the podcast today. So, there was an investigation into contaminated water on U.S. aircraft carriers Nimitz and Abraham Lincoln. What did the Navy's investigation find?
Sure. So last fall, there were 2 separate incidents regarding the Nimitz and Abraham Lincoln. In September and October of last year, both of them suddenly started discovering some funky, very dirty water coming out of the water fountains, out of the shower heads. Basically, both carriers' potable water systems were contaminated for different reasons. This week, the Navy released two separate investigations, one into the Nimitz incident and one into the Abraham Lincoln. When it came to the contaminated water aboard the Lincoln, that was found to be responsible or was found to be due to what's known as bilge getting into the potable water system. Bilge is kind of this super gross amalgamation of dirty water, grease, oil, just a bunch of liquid byproducts that the ship and its thousands of sailors produce every day. Somehow, basically a piece of pipe corroded and there was a hole in it. And whenever the bilge levels in this one holding tank got too high, it was seeping into the drinking water that way. When it came to the Nimitz, it was a bit more of a revelation in terms of the investigation. It turned out that for several years, dating back to at least 2020, 8 of the ship's 26 potable water tanks had been out of commission due to a suspected contamination with seawater. The investigation finds that when Nimitz went to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in early 2022, they tried to get some help to get these kind of properly cleaned and recharged and ready to go for their deployment. But the shipyard and the ship just didn't have time to fix all of them. So basically, the crew tried to devise some workarounds to get 7 of the 8 affected water tanks kind of back in action. But they didn't know that one of the tanks, at least one of the tanks, also had jet fuel in it. So when they started trying to circulate and flush the portable water systems, they ended up sending JP5 jet fuel, into the entire or nearly the entire carrier potable water system. Navy officials tell us at least 11 sailors are believed to have been sickened from drinking this tainted water. The system was eventually repaired and fixed, but questions still remain about why this carrier was, floating around for several years with more than a third of its potable water tanks not operational. Based on the dates they've given us, Nimitz did a record-breaking 340-day deployment from April 2020 to February 2021. And based on the dates in the investigation, they were doing that super long deployment without a bunch of their potable water tanks online.
What has been the reaction from some leaders, whether they're civilian or uniformed, within the service?
I haven't heard anything from civilians, to be honest. We were in touch with a lot of rank and file sailors on the ships when all this happened last fall, and they were sending us photos, recordings of the addresses the commanding officers were given to the crew to update them. The Navy and Naval Air Forces, which oversees the carrier fleet, they're now saying they're doing a bunch of reforms and we're kind of reminding the carriers that they need to follow the procedures and stuff like that. But these investigations suggest some systemic problems that so far, as we sit here on Tuesday afternoon, have not been fully addressed by the Navy.
Jeff Zazulowicz, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff. For more conversations like that one, please like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Also on the radar for today, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced some news Tuesday about the U.S. southern border. He plans to send more than 1,100 National Guard soldiers and law enforcement officers to Texas to assist with border security between the United States and Mexico. The Republican governor said he's sending 800 soldiers, 200 Florida Department of Law Enforcement officers, 101 state troopers, and 20 wildlife officers. According to a release, Florida will also send 5 planes, 17 drones, 2 command vehicles, and 10 boats. Our team previously reported about 1,500 active duty troops were to be deployed to the U.S. southern border in advance of an expected new wave of migrant crossing attempts. State and federal officials have been concerned about a possible surge in border crossings after pandemic-era asylum restrictions ended last week. The number of encounters at the southern border have reportedly dropped in the last few days since the policy ended. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said it's still too early to tell if the migrant surge has peaked. And now, here are some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. an unknown man reportedly managed to slip undetected inside the home of White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The Secret Service is investigating. President Joe Biden is set to cut short an upcoming overseas trip in hopes of reaching a deal on the debt ceiling and preventing an unprecedented national default before a June 1st deadline. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un recently saw a military spy satellite his country is expected to launch soon. And CNN is reporting that the Department of Homeland Security directed its agencies to review and assess who has access to classified information. DHS oversees the Coast Guard. The move comes on the heels of a leak of highly classified Pentagon documents discovered earlier this year. And on this day in history, in 1953, American military aviator Jacqueline Cochran became the first woman to break the sound barrier. That's it for us this morning. To get more of the top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media @defense_news and @militarytones. The Early Bird Brief is hosted by me, Jonathan Lehrfeld, and produced by Simone Z. Perez. Today's episode features stories by Davis Winke, Stephen Losi, Jeff Zuzulowitz, and the Associated Press. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Gruss. Have a great day.